Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin and the War in Ukraine with Dr. Brovkin playlist. Today I'd like to talk about the current situation in Ukraine, and the title is The Crisis of Zelensky's Regime, or The Crisis of Zelensky Government. Now, about a week ago, I posted a video titled Talking Victory and Facing Defeat. And since then, there were several important developments that took place in Ukraine itself. Therefore, I shall pose a thesis that Ukraine's political crisis is sharpening, and that Zelensky faces a serious crisis that could be called unraveling of his regime. It is probably a matter of several months or at the shortest several weeks until it all collapses. And there are two types of reasons. One is the domestic situation and the other is the international situation. And I shall start with the new developments in the domestic situation in Ukraine. Now, the most important, of course, is the very, very serious crisis at the front line. One could even speak about the collapse in several places of Ukrainian positions, most notably in Kursk. One could even say that the Kursk affair, which was so much hope was put on by Zelensky and so much celebrated in the West as Russia's weakness, as inability to defend its borders, and so on and so forth, well, now it is coming to an end after 2 months. Several units of Ukraine's army are surrounded and are being destroyed as we speak. There are several pockets that are being surrounded, and the Russian troops are closing in on Sudzha, the most important hub in this territory occupied by Ukrainian troops. It is collapsing. Also, over the last week, the most important event in the front was the Ugledar, which is the very, very center of coal production in the south of Donbass. And there was a significant Russian breakthrough, and the several units were surrounded. Some were running through the fields because they didn't receive an orderly order to retreat. There were some very dramatic scenes reported that in one unit over 100 men deserted, abandoned their positions and disappeared, and the commander of that unit shot himself. It was a rout. It was nowhere close to orderly retreat. And there are several reports that the desertion at the front is taking enormous proportions. I believe I heard figures that there were 75,000 Ukrainian troops that deserted in 2024. In this connection with this collapse of the front and the massive desertion, Ukrainian regime, which means Zelensky's regime, answered with unprecedented and heartbreaking measures, which you see on the news, and that is a raid on the concert halls and restaurants and gas stations and railway stations in hunting for young men. And there are many, many scenes when these young men are seized and they resist and they kick and they try to escape, and they're shoved into buses and shipped to locations where they are registered and then thrown into the battle. There are also reports of pervasive corruption. In fact, today, Alessia Medvedeva published some data in her videos that once you are in the bus, it costs $1,000 to be let go. Once they bring you to the mobilization station, it costs $3,000 or $5,000. worth of money. It could be in hryvnia, in Ukrainian currency, to be released. And then if you want to be let go, sometimes the price is $20,000, which is a price of a car, or if it's small apartment in not capital city, in a smaller town, this would be the price of a small apartment. So the prices mean basically that the rich and the well-to-do can and still do buy the freedom from mobilization, and it is the poorest ones who are grabbed on the streets and shoved into buses and then shipped as cannon fodder to the collapsing front line. So this is the situation in Ukraine, and in this context, Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, passed a law that prevented Zelensky from inaugurating draft of 18-year-old to 25-year-old. So it was a clear sign of opposition to Zelensky that the parliament stopped a possible widening of mobilization, and it is in response to this ban that they started grabbing men on the streets and verifying their credentials, and if they were of the draft age, they also were subject to this treatment. Also, Rada passed another interesting law, which instead of making more severe punishment for desertion at the front, they loosened it. In other words, if a person voluntarily came back to his unit after an absence of whatever, he would not be punished, and then he could be re-enlisted, which kind of shows that there is a rift between the Rada and Zelensky, which is extremely important because, strictly speaking, the political power, essentially the functions of the president should be fulfilled by Ukrainian constitution, by the chairman of the Rada, not by Zelensky. Strictly speaking, he is not a legitimate president because his term expired in May 2024. And these acts show that there is a kind of a rift between the parliament and Zelensky. Now, this is only one side of the growing problem for Zelensky. The second one is that there is a growing quarrel between Zelensky and his closest of associates. And I divide them into sort of three tiers. The external tier are those who used to be his close associates, and now they're on their own, and they still consider themselves potentially as leaders of Ukraine. And some of them are in the West, and some of them are in Russia. Those in the West, the most prominent is Arestovich. And essentially, people like Arestovich, and there's another one, Karasyev, who I think is in Ukraine. These are the people who take the position that it is time to sign peace, and it is better to lose some territories of Donbass to Russia, but to preserve Ukrainian statehood and to start a process of rebuilding and restructuring. For that, their policy, their proposal is to have new elections, and then a new president with his backing of electorate would be able to take difficult decisions, such as agree to Russian terms of the loss of Donbass and acceptance of Ukrainian neutrality, which, by the way, was guaranteed by its proclamation of independence in 1991. And therefore to turn the page and start building kind of peaceful life. Now, they hope that the majority of Ukrainian people are obviously in favor of stopping the war because everyone is tired of the bombs and mobilizations and endless casualties at the front. So this is the external circle of elite in Ukraine. The second one I would call are people that are closest to the closest. And these are the people who had worked with Zelensky just a few months ago. The most prominent among those is Zaluzhny, General Zaluzhny, who is the author of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2023. And in those days, just exactly a year ago, he was going around as a cause célèbre in Western circles, as he is the one who delivered a crushing blow to Russia and achieved victory by breaking through Russian lines and occupying Crimea. In fact, a year ago, they were saying, we will meet New Year in Sebastopol in Crimea. Well, it fizzled out, and now it is the Russians who are advising, and Zaluzhny is fired, and he is supposedly an ambassador to London, but nobody knows what exactly he's doing. But he's definitely created himself a reputation of a national leader who could easily replace Zelensky. Now, and then there was this crisis a few weeks ago when several ministers in the government resigned or were forced to resign. The most prominent of them is Foreign Minister Kuleba, well known in the West, who I'm sure has plenty of contacts and support in the West. And these are the kinds of people who could potentially replace Zelensky in power. And finally, there was the most recent quarrel, which could have catastrophic consequences for Zelensky, and that is his quarrel with Mr. Budanov. Just about several weeks ago, Budanov spoke at the conference in Kiev, which I had a video on, where they discussed how Ukraine would win, and it has the support of all the Americans and the Polish and the Baltics, and everybody was there from NATO countries, arguing about how best to achieve victory over Russia. Well, now Budanov himself is in trouble. There are public documents made available that the company that he controlled was involved in corruption, and it was buying Western military hardware through some other company in, I think, Czech Republic. And the audit showed that for each item they charged 100 euros or dollars more. And that is, of course, a serious blow to Budanov, who is in charge of foreign military intelligence, or simply military intelligence. In other words, this is a man who has tremendous contacts in the West, who has as intelligence enormous data on pretty much most figures in Ukraine, perhaps even some compromat or compromising material on Zelensky himself. And it wouldn't be that easy for Zelensky to oust Budanov. He also could be considered as one of the top candidates if there is a crisis. Now, as a historian, looking at the situation in Ukraine now, I cannot avoid comparing it to the situation in France during the French Revolution, when one day Mr. Robespierre announced that there are enemies everywhere and they need to be unmasked and arrested. And instead, the next day, he was arrested and executed because everybody was afraid that they would be next on the list. So the parallel with Zelensky is that he made too many enemies. And now, when this quarrel shows that he has basically signaled that he is ready to reshuffle his cabinet one more time and to oust next bunch of very prominent people. And it could well happen that they instead would remove him. Now, his troubles are not yet over simply in domestic situation. There's enormous clouds gathering in the West, but this is a subject of a separate video, and most people have followed Western other sources about his contacts in Europe and his failure to convince others that his plan is going to work. Finally, I'd like to finish by saying that the domestic situation, as I had tried to show here, of Mr. Zelensky is critical. The support of the people is waning. And in fact, it's a rebellion that is brewing against him in the armed forces and among those who are subject to draft. And it is only a matter of time before this regime collapses. And I'll stop at that, and thank you very much. I enjoy your comments, and please be aware that I have my many video playlists: War in Ukraine, the issues of contemporary politics, Russia under Yeltsin and Putin, Russian history, West European history. Check out my playlists, and also please check out my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, Russia in Search of Its Identity, Routledge, London, 2024. See you next time. Bye-bye.